Again, good morning to those of you who are joining us. Welcome and thank you for attending our webinar this morning. My name is Tia Marie Doxey, and I am the Interim Associate Provost for Institutional Research and Analysis and Chief Data Officer. And I also serve as the Director of Surveys and Evaluation at North Carolina Central University. I want to thank the Office of the Provost and Title III programs for serving as our sponsor
It's a new
and
one. It's a new
providing
one.
the resources so that we can offer this event today. We have over 177 participants registered for today. Many are administrators, faculty, students, and staff at NCCU, and we also have colleagues from across North Carolina. Other states that are represented in the audience are Alabama, Delaware, Georgia, Louisiana, Missouri, Texas, and Virginia. I am pleased to have so many participants today. Thank you for your interest. The Office of Institutional Research and Analysis at North Carolina Central University includes in our mission the value and intention to foster a culture of data literacy. We do this through several strategies, including providing yearly webinars for our campus and colleagues that address different aspects of data and data analysis. Today, our speaker, Dr. Susan Gracia, brings her professional experience, knowledge, and insight for understanding and using survey data and analytics to advance the needs of the campus and stakeholders like ourselves, or like yourselves. Dr. Gracia is the Senior Associate Director of Data Literacy at Northeastern University, where she leads the development and implementation of a university-wide data literacy program. She creates learning opportunities, assessments, and certifications while fostering a data community across the university. With over 25 years of experience in survey design, Susan has taught survey methodology at the graduate level and designed institutional surveys at Rhode Island College and Simmons College. At Northeastern, she authored the Data Maturity Assessment Survey to track data culture and progress. She also consults on curriculum and program evaluation, creating reliable surveys for diverse projects. Susan has taught the mp4 in Data Analytics and EdD programs at Northeastern and is a visiting professor at the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Peru. She has also taught business-driven analysis and data literacy at Pragmatic Institute. Susan holds a PhD in educational research, measurement, and evaluation from Boston College, along with certificates in data science and predictive analytics from UC Irvine and Cornell. The next voice that you will hear will be that of Dr. Susan Gracia. Let's give her a warm virtual welcome.
Thank you very, very much for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it, Tia Marie. I'm so happy to be here. I love that you have an annual data literacy event, and this is your 5th year, something I can think of to do at my own institution. And I'm really excited to see so many people here in the virtual room and to, just from the comments to hear that some of you are alumni, some of you are, faculty, staff, that so many people are interested in a topic like this. So I'm very excited to be here and to talk about surveys and how survey design influences not just the data collect, but the insights that we produce and really, why do we even want those insights? It's to make some decisions that are important to, and in our context. So I'd love to get started. Let me try and advance. Yes, okay. By the end of this session, I hope that you'll be able to do, what you can see on the screen, that this session will help you judge whether survey data is trustworthy for decision making. I hope that this session will also help you spot some of the most common survey pitfalls and learn how to mitigate them. You should be able to recognize the key elements of solid survey foundations and connect survey methodology directly to data literacy. We'll kind of go in that order, but I have to say the last point about the connection between data literacy and survey methodology is a little bit woven throughout the presentation. And so kind of in short, the session is about becoming smarter survey designers and more critical survey users. But I'd love to start with a quick reflection and a little bit of input from you. And I have a question for you. And I'm asking you to think about the last time you acted on survey results, maybe in your work, maybe when you were a student. What made you confident in the results? And I tend to use an app called Slido.com for interactive questions like this. Anything you say is anonymous. But if you put your camera or your cell phone at the QR code, you'll be brought right to Slido and you can just type in a short answer. You can also go to slido.com and put in that code. But I'd love to hear from you about this. When do you feel confident in the results of a survey? Give you a minute, a couple of minutes. To see people typing. Okay. Oh, thank you to the very first person. Yeah, when all the questions are answered, that is a nice feeling. Okay. Mhm. Good. When more than 50% of participants respond. Oh, yeah. So when they answer all the questions and when a lot of people respond, that helps us be more confident. The design is important, the sample size. Were the results of vetted assessments? Were the assessments validated, maybe tested out? Did they follow it when they followed a certain methodology? Let's see, response rate, sampling, design. The data are clean. The quality of the data is very important. Let's see if confidence. Yeah, and that could be, confidence level statistically speaking, or just confidence in the results. Oh, I like what I see on top when the quantitative data has qualitative statements to provide context. I think that really helps us balance out what we learn. So thank you very much to the people who've responded. This gives me a good understanding of, what you look for when or a bit of what, makes a survey quality for you. Preparation was on point to produce relevant results. Yeah, all of these themes will be touched upon in the presentation, and I can see that we have people on in the call who are experienced with survey design, maybe survey use, and know, what some of these elements are that we want to look for. So thank you very much. And here's the big idea one idea that I'd like to share. Surveys don't collect data, they actually create it. Sometimes we talk about collecting this data with a survey as if it's already sitting out there, but we are creating data that doesn't exist. And the quality of that data really depends on the quality of the questions we ask and the way we design our survey. So every decision we make in the process, who we survey, what we ask, how and when we ask our questions, shapes the data set that we are creating. So a true data literacy begins with one key question, and I can apply it to surveys here. Where did the numbers from the survey, or where did the information come from? And if we don't ask that, then we risk treating survey results as neutral facts, when in reality, they're constructed through our choices as people. What questions do we ask? How are we framing this? And we need to know where all the information comes from. And I love that the definition that your institution has of data literacy. And you define data literacy as the ability to read, work with, analyze, interpret, and communicate data to make informed decisions. I think this is quite a thorough definition of data literacy. And I urge you to think about how survey design touches each of these points. Reading and evaluating sources, in other words, knowing where our survey data is coming from, working with messy response data or survey response data, analyzing our survey responses with statistics or qualitative methods, interpreting our survey data with nuance, communicating our survey data to different stakeholders and different groups, and obviously trying to make informed decisions based on the data that we have generated from our surveys. So I really would say that surveys are one of the clearest, most everyday examples of data literacy in action. And here are 5 guiding principles to keep in mind with regard to data literacy. We always, key points in data literacy are that we always want to evaluate our sources. And if we connect this to surveys, that would be asking who responded to our survey and how. It's really important to know the limitations of our data. Every data set, no matter how well you think it's been produced or constructed, but every data set has weaknesses. And I think it's important to remember that surveys rely on self-report, which in itself has some problematic characteristics. Whether people don't remember well what they're being asked about, sometimes they want to give socially desirable answers and don't want to really communicate what they think because they are afraid people might judge them. They might be afraid to give their true opinions because they don't know who's going to see the data. So there are some inherent limitations of survey data. It's important to recognize the bias that is inherent in our data as well, maybe because of the order in which we ask our questions, maybe because of the wording that we use, maybe because of our methodology. There are a lot of ways in which bias and error that comes along with that can enter into the survey design process and the interpretation process as well. In all data literacy, I talk a lot about context. You can have some data, but you need to know where it comes from. And context matters as well in survey design and survey use. It's important to know the timing of when the survey was administered and the data was created. It's important to know about the audience. It's important to know why was the survey designed and given out. And evidence-based decisions, or I would say evidence-informed decisions, are what we're looking for in any good data literacy. We want to make decisions that are informed by the data that we have access to and the insights that we gain. And these principles, that are basic principles of data literacy, really help us stay honest when we create surveys and when we use someone else's. And when you ask, or when I ask, can I trust this survey? Can I trust this data? I think it's useful to use what is called the total survey error framework to consider where and how error or bias may enter into your survey data. And the total survey error framework identifies 5 types of error that apply to surveys. If you look at this wheel here, I'll start from the top left. There's coverage error, or there can be coverage error in surveys. And that's when the people that you survey don't represent totally or the population you care about. So for example, suppose you send out an employee survey, an employee satisfaction survey across the university, and you send it to everyone's work or institutional email address. However, we know a lot of frontline staff don't use their work email. So as a result, their voices might be missing from the data. And so that introduces coverage error into your survey data and what you do with it. We move up to the right. Sampling error is another source of error in any survey. And that's the natural variation that comes from surveying a sample instead of everyone. And you can have done, like the most sophisticated, greatest random sampling of your population as possible. And still there will be a little bit of error, a little bit of variation from if you surveyed everyone. And then imagine if you use convenience sampling, like you have anybody who's conveniently near you or you have access to answer your survey. then you're introducing a much more, a greater amount of sampling error. And then you have to be a little suspect when you interpret the results. A third type of error to think about is non-response error, and that's bias that enters into the equation when certain groups don't answer. It's rare in higher education to send out a survey and get 100% response rate. So we know there's error because we don't get everyone that we want to. Measurement error is another type of error to be aware of, and that has to do with the instrument itself. Maybe there's confusing wording in your survey. Maybe the response options aren't clear, or they're kind of poorly constructed, or there might be flaws in kind of the mode of administration that can introduce some error into the process as well. And then the last type of error in this total survey error framework is called processing error, and that's mistakes in data entry and coding or analysis. And I want to point out that no survey is error-free, no survey is perfect, and I am not suggesting that you quantify, the exact amount of error that occurs when you design or administer a survey. What I am encouraging is that you think about these errors as you design your survey and as you use the data, and that will help you decide whether the results are good enough for the decisions that you want to make. And so I'd like to get a little bit of input from you again, thinking of these kinds of survey errors, which ones, or which one have you encountered most frequently? Or maybe I could even reword it, which one is the most challenging in your work? I'm forcing you to choose one. There could be more that are relevant, but okay, we've got four people, and they had all said non-response. We've got more people now. Measurement error. Non-response error, I mean, for me too, is a big challenge. Tia Marie talked about that data maturity assessment that I designed and that we administer at my institution. We administered it the first time in 2023. We just repeated it in 2025, a couple of months ago. And each time we sent the survey to every employee in the university, which was about 5,000. And each time we got a response rate of 39%, which isn't bad in higher education, to tell you the truth. But that means 61% of our employees did not answer. So we know there's non-response error that is part of the data that we collected. I will talk in a few minutes about some ways you can check to see if that non-response error really hurts your results, but it's definitely a challenge. I see measurement error, that maybe the coding is off, or maybe there's some errors as data is entered. If, say you have paper surveys and somebody's entering it, that certainly enters into our work. Coverage error, at least, a couple of you sampling error as well, and processing. So yeah, for every person who answered, one of these is, a bigger problem than others, but by far the most common response is non-response error. That's a very big challenge. And instead of asking, is my survey perfect? I think it's more useful to ask, is it fit for my use? And so there's some qualities or characteristics to check for. So you can answer that. I may have a survey, I've administered it, I've got some data, but is it fit? It's important to check the relevance of the survey. Does it align with your purpose and your questions that you're asking? Check the accuracy. And when I talk about accuracy, I'm thinking like compare it with some of the benchmarks you already have. For example, if you know that 60% of your employees are women, but only 45% of your survey respondents are women, then some of your accuracy is off due to undercoverage or non-response, whatever the case might have been. It's also important to check the timeliness of the survey. Is the data still relevant, to whatever you're asking, or does the data actually reflect a different point in time? If you're interested in comparing across groups or maybe across time, like we were doing with this data maturity assessment, it's really important that your questions are the same and the responses are the same and the mode of, administration is the same if you want to be able to compare. And interpretability as well. Are the methods and the limitations of the survey clearly documented? That really helps you interpret the results of your survey and helps you decide whether the survey and the data are good enough to guide your decisions. We've all encountered some pitfalls in our work with surveys, either as creator or user of surveys. We've already mentioned some of them as well. I'm going to talk about six of, at least in my opinion, my experience, some of six of the most common pitfalls and some ways that you can fix them or at least mitigate them. And we've already talked about this a little bit. Pitfall number one is, unrepresentative samples. Sometimes our survey results don't represent the population that we're interested in because key groups were left out or maybe key groups didn't answer. Another example, maybe you have an employee satisfaction survey and you only, survey employees who work during the day. Obviously, the people who work at night or in other times are left out. And there's some fixes, that can help you. I would encourage people to use multiple outreach channels. You may use Qualtrics sent to people through email. Qualtrics now, you can send a Qualtrics survey to people's texts, maybe reach out to people on social media. So broaden your reach that way. You also, if you think you have a representative sample, it's useful to compare your respondents to the population that you know about so you can determine the degree to which the sample might be unrepresentative. And you might find it's surprisingly similar to the population you're interested. And I also would encourage you to be really transparent about coverage gaps when you're sharing the results of your survey work. And another point I just wanted to point out as I'm looking at this slide is the slides here, I tried to make them um, text heavy enough, I hope not too much, that you could use the slide deck as a resource. So I'm not reading everything, or there's some points on each of the slides I might not touch on exactly, but I'm hoping that you can use the slides, as a helpful resource as you go forward with your survey work. Forgot to say that at the beginning. Yeah, a second pitfall, we've already alluded to it, is low response rate. And the pitfall here is getting a low response rate, but not doing a bias check. A low response rate isn't automatically bad. I got a 39% response rate in my survey, but ignoring who didn't respond is bad or can be detrimental. So if overworked faculty skip a workload survey, your results might look more positive than they really are. And a fix or some fixes for this is to increase your response rates with lots of reminders to people. And I'm going to talk about this more in a little while. To make your surveys as short as they can be while still being thorough. And I'm going to address this in a few minutes. And incentives, even token incentives, can help increase response rate. And another thing to do, and I did this with our data maturity assessment, is that I compared the responders, the 39%, with the 61% who didn't respond. And I compared them, I looked at their distribution across like departments at the university, job type, whether they were full-time, part-time, length of service at the university, to find out, are our responders really different from our non-responders? In most cases, I found there really was no statistically significant difference, which gave me some confidence in the results. But I can't share my results without making it clear every time. Remember, this is 39%. So I think it's important to be cautious as well. A third pitfall that I'm sure you've all encountered is ambiguous or leading questions. Poorly worded questions really sink data quality. And what we call double-barreled questions, and they can be triple-barreled or, what would it be? Quadruple-barreled, where we ask 2 or 3 or 4 things at once, can confuse people. And I don't know how to make sense of the results. I mean, look at this question up here on the screen. It's a double-barreled question. How satisfied are you with your professor's teaching quality and availability for office hours? We're asking about two things, teaching quality and availability. And say you have an agree, disagree scale, strongly disagree, disagree, agree, strongly agree. If people strongly agree or strongly disagree, you can kind of make sense of the results. But say someone says they somewhat disagree or partially agree. Do you know, is the agreement with the part that is teaching quality? Is it with availability for office hours? Is it both? You really, it's hard for me to make sense of that and know how to act. So I would say divide this into two questions. How satisfied are you with your professor's teaching quality? And then another one about office hours. Um, a question can also be leading. Like, how would you rate our new professional development workshops or our excellent professional development workshops? Sometimes the questions are worded in a way that kind of tries to sway the respondents a certain way. Also, our response skills can be leading. Say that there was that question, how would you rate the new professional development workshops? And the scale was excellent, very good, good, fair, and poor. In this case, we've got more response options that are positive than we do negative. So there's kind of more likelihood that people are going to be on that positive side of the scale. We want balance in our response scales, kind of a symmetrical spread of positive and negative. So the fix to both of these issues is ask one clear question at a time, use neutral language, and always pre-test. I'm going to talk more about this as well, so that you can, if you pre-test your survey, you can get input from people about the clarity of your survey. When we look at surveys we design ourselves, sometimes we don't see issues, and so reaching out to others is good. The fourth pitfall is what I call hidden methods, which leads to no or reduced trust. And that means, if you don't know the basics about a survey that maybe you're presented with, or a report or a dashboard that comes out of a survey, if you don't know who was surveyed, how they were surveyed, when, what the survey looked like, you really can't trust the results. So the fix is to disclose everything. Share with your audience, your stakeholders, the population you were aiming at, the sample that answered the survey, and how you determined that sample, or how you got to that sample of people, your recruitment method, the dates, your response rate, and share the full questionnaire. That disclosure engenders trust. And so if you're the designer, you're helping your audience trust you. And if you're on the other end, it helps you or us trust the results that are shared with us, and maybe the decisions too that are made as a result. The fifth pitfall is wrong survey length. And that can be a survey that's too short, where you miss important detail, or too long and people drop out or rush through. And I think we all know that we don't want to burden our respondents. We know that long surveys can cause people to become tired or drop out. And the fix is to aim for a survey, if you can, that's no more than 10 to 15 minutes. I would recommend, or others recommend, two to four items per construct. And a construct is a term you hear a lot in survey design, and that a construct is an abstract quality or trait or characteristic that you're measuring, but you can't observe directly. Maybe an attitude or a belief or somebody's practice. You can't observe it, so you're asking people about it. And I would say avoid single item measures for complex attitudes. I find sometimes in the effort to not overburden our respondents, surveys are really, really short, and they don't ask enough questions. I often compare this to like a child's. If you want to know if a child has learned their multiplication tables, you wouldn't just give them one multiplication problem to answer. you say, I need more examples to really be confident that this child knows their multiplication tables. And, if you're measuring something complex like people's attitudes, you can't just ask one question. You do need a few questions. It's a hard balance between the length and people's time, but things you can do also are you can use skip logic to help manage respondent burden. You could consider modular designs for long surveys where you have modules or sections of your survey and you can randomly assign respondents to answer certain modules. And you have to design that into it, but then everyone isn't answering every question and not becoming too overwhelmed. And again, aim for 10 to 15 minutes or around that if you can. The final pitfall that I see a lot, and it is quite controversial in the survey field, is midpoint misuse or maybe midpoint questions. I was trained when I was trained to design surveys to use an even number of response scales without a middle point. And some people say, oh, some people were trained the opposite way. But be careful about those midpoints on your scales, like the not sure, I don't know, neither agree nor disagree. They can be useful, these midpoints in a scale, but they often are misused as an easy out kind of response or a don't know, don't care. In some cultures, neutrality is, a real answer. So, you be conscious of something like that. But I would say if the construct that you are using has a real neutral or middle point, if it makes sense, include a middle point. But otherwise, use even number scales when neutrality isn't meaningful. Again, if it is, you can use an odd number scale. But what I do most often is I'll use a even number scale like strongly disagree, disagree, agree, strongly agree. And then I will include a clear don't know or not sure option separately, and then test that and take that into account when I interpret the results. So, I've talked about some common pitfalls that probably you all have experienced. Let's talk now about like strong foundations to think about from the beginning when you're designing surveys. And the first one is to have clear objectives. I think this is a recommendation for us in all of our work in general. It's really important and effective to begin survey design or survey development with the decision that you want to make, with that having that in mind, and the questions that would need to be answered in order to make the decisions that you're interested in. And go from there. What questions will the survey need to address and answer? What will this survey help you decide? And then map that journey from the constructs, the concepts or the practices or the attitudes that you want to get data about to the questions that map back to these constructs, and then think about how you will analyze this data and how that could go forward to be used for recommendations and decisions. And I would say also cut anything that doesn't serve your purpose. It can be really tempting to slip in extra questions just in case, or, we've also wanted to know this or that. But I would say resist that temptation and leave them out if they're not directly aligned with your purpose and the purpose of the survey. Do not include them in the survey. A second strong foundation of a survey is the introduction to the survey, and that introduction can be in the survey invitation. Often when I craft a survey invitation, I'll give I have maybe a little paragraph or so about the purpose and why I'm inviting that person to participate. I also sometimes usually repeat a little bit of that in the survey itself, but good introductions matter. And it's important to tell people why the survey exists, how long it takes, what confidentiality protections are in place, and why their voice matters. And that trust improves both response rates and quality. And, this connects to something that is mentioned in the work of, there's a really well-known survey researcher. His name is Donald Dillman, and I'm going to talk about him and some of his research again in a few minutes. But he argued that there's actually an element of what, social exchange in the decision to respond to a survey or not. Dillman said that people decide whether to respond to a survey the same way they decide whether to help someone in real life, through social exchange. And that means they weigh the perceived rewards of responding against the perceived costs of the time, that they would have to put into responding. And if the rewards outweigh the costs and trust is high, they're more likely to participate. And there's also some strong research by Dillman and others that shows that response rates rise, they increase when survey invitations frame participation as a socially meaningful exchange rather than just a data request. This is why we need you to to participate in this. This is how it's going to help us or some situation. Sometimes if you offer to share the results with people too, that increases, the level of social exchange. And so this is where and why introductions matter. Because surveys aren't just technical tools, they really are social interactions between us, for the designers and our participants. Another strong foundation for surveys is pre-testing. Pre-testing your survey is the best way to catch problems before your survey goes out into, the real world. And, it's kind of a basic way of doing this is pre-testing your survey with 3 to 5 people. And you can do it a couple of ways. Sometimes people recommend that you sit down with somebody and you ask them to like verbalize what they're thinking as they look at the survey questions and decide what to do. It's kind of a talk aloud way of pre-testing. And, if you listen to people's thought processes, you can think, oh, I didn't really expect that that's what people would think when they saw this, or I didn't think this would be confusing, but this person's telling me that it is confusing. So that's one way of doing pre-testing. You could also, have 3 to 5 people take your survey and then ask them afterwards, was there anything that was unclear? Was there anything that was confusing? And anything you would change to make it more clear? And the small investment in the time that it would take to pre-test can really save big problems later down the line. And then my fourth strong foundation tip is to tell you there is a whole science of survey design. Dillman is a big, name in this science of survey design. And if you're interested in it, I recommend that you check it out. Dillman has a book that's been revised and updated multiple times called The Tailored Design Method. And the research shows us that there are certain practices on our part that result in measurable increases in response rates and data quality. So, for example, the science of survey design has concluded that if we send 3 to 5 waves of reminders and follow-ups to people, that will maximize our response rate. And there's specific wording and specific tones that are recommended in each of these reminders, each a little bit different from the one before, with measurable increases in response rates. And I'll tell you, I follow when I'm designing my survey and when I'm crafting my reminders and everything, I have that tailored design book or resource next to me, and I follow that. Also, the science of survey design has told us if we personalize our survey invitations, Dear John, that increases survey response. Respectful introductions, I talked about that before. Clear visual design, enough white space, not cluttered. That results in a measurable increase in response rates. Strategic incentives also are helpful. Most institutions can't afford to pay everybody to take every survey, but they can be kind of token. Maybe you're entered in a raffle. You might have a small number of gift cards that you could send out. And so people know they don't have a high chance of responding, but it can help encourage people. Also, the just saying to people, we will share these results with you afterwards. If you're interested in giving them the option to receive them, that is a kind of incentive as well. Um, and of course, it's important being concise in your survey, but comprehensive enough. Having that balance results in higher response rates. So if you're interested, I encourage you to look at the work of Dillman, and he also has some collaborators at this point. And so, before hitting send on your survey, the little pre-launch checklist that I would recommend is, make sure your purpose is aligned. Are your questions aligned with their purpose? Is your wording clear and neutral? Do your response options make sense? Can most people finish in 10 to 15 minutes? This little checklist can help prevent some of the most common survey disasters or mishaps. And I would point out too that surveys build our data literacy in a couple of ways. When we think of data and data users, we often talk about data creators and data consumers. Creators are the people who design surveys. They're the people who design, write the reports, build the dashboards. And as creators, we just can design better surveys that produce trustworthy data by incorporating some of the elements of data literacy that we've talked about today. And the consumers are the people who are kind of on the receiving end. They view the dashboards and have to interpret them and make decisions or look at the reports or, get the data that someone else has generated. And so incorporating data literacy into our work with surveys as consumers helps us evaluate whether surveys are worth it, in terms of our using in our own work. And both roles strengthen the overall data ecosystem. And so I mentioned a pre-launch survey, pre-launch considerations. Here are just four kind of basic items in a checklist you could use when reviewing any survey results. First, does the sample represent the group of interest? Who didn't respond? And does it matter? And did the researchers or the authors make that clear? Were the questions neutral and tested? Were the methods transparent? This is like a quick, really basic checklist, but it can help you avoid shaking or avoid acting on really shaky data. So, wrapping up a bit, we've looked at the connection between data literacy and survey design and use, talked a little bit about the total survey error framework, which helps us understand where bias can sneak into our survey and our survey results. We've talked about 6 common pitfalls and some ways to mitigate them. We've talked about some strong foundational practices to implement upfront and some science-backed strategies for making our surveys stronger. We have a couple of basic checklists to help us design and evaluate our surveys with confidence. And I'd love a little bit of feedback from you again at this point. And this is my final prompt. I want to show you one more thing before we kind of open up the floor for questions. But what's one thing that you will or you could change in your next survey design or survey-based decision, maybe based on, or hopefully based on something you heard today? Yeah. Okay. Oh, great. Thank you to the first person. More survey testing. Yeah, it's sometimes we, including myself, we jump from we've got the survey that looks good, and then we send it out. But that survey testing can give us some good information. Sometimes, I end up dropping questions once I've gotten the data because it becomes clear from the response patterns that this question wasn't clear and I can't use the data, and testing can help avoid that. Let's see what else people might have to say. Make sure it resonates with the respondents. I'm thinking you might be thinking of like the introductions, in that kind of whole idea of social exchange. What's in it for them, even if it's not a monetary thing, but why do I want to help, and how can we help people want to? The social exchange language, Yeah, sorry about, sometimes with these word clouds, sometimes you can really make sense of the results, and then sometimes it looks like random words. So I see somebody commented on the neutral. I think the neutral midpoint of a response scale. Let's see, consider midpoint misuse, pre-testing. Let's see, social exchange. Yeah, okay. Consider midpoint misuse is the biggest theme. Uh, Demographics, keep the biases in mind, target my audience more specifically. Mhm. And I want to stress too, no measurement instrument is ever 100% perfect and free of any error or bias. Um, and so I'm not like suggesting, I'm not demanding, I'm not suggesting you demand no error or no bias, but if we know where to look for it before we design and send out our survey, and as we look at our results, it can be really helpful. And I think it's good to be clear with people. We didn't get responses from 61% of our employees, but we've compared the the two groups are really similar on these characteristics. So we have, good confidence in the results, but we do need to keep in mind who didn't answer. Okay, let's see. Targeting, bias. All right, test the surveys more. Thank you very much for and consider midpoint misuse. I don't know how many people said that, but it's the biggest theme here. And I've got here some references for you if you are interested in, looking more deeply into this. I highlighted three for a specific reason. This DeVellis reference called Scale Development, it was instrumental to me when I was learning. I was in my own survey design course, and I found it really clear, really useful in understanding how to design a good survey. I've taught survey design, as Tia Marie noted. I've used it as a textbook too. The Dillman book, that's 2014. I think there's a more recently updated one, but I have used that as a text in my survey design classes, and I have used it as a hands-on resource for me at myself as I've designed surveys and my reminders, and considered how to visually design my surveys. And that the Groves reference, I've also used that in my survey design training. So I think all of these are good, but those three that I highlighted have been especially useful for me in a couple of different ways. So thank you for your attention. And if they have any, oh, I know there are questions. So Tia Marie, do you want to add?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for that
Mm-hmm.
outstanding presentation. I'm
You're
already
welcome.
excited about starting the survey process, even after this workshop. So thank you, thank you, thank
Mhm.
you. So we have
Thank
some
you.
questions. We
Mm-hmm.
gave you an opportunity to
Yeah.
ask
Mm-hmm.
questions as you register.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Mm-hmm.
first one I'm looking at says, in an age of AI and mobile usage, is response bias worse than ever? If so, how do we adapt?
Yeah, I did look at some of the kind of research on that, having seen that question ahead of time. And there is a lot of research that says yes, like non-response is worse than it was before the age of easy online surveys. Um, so, and it's easy to ignore these surveys that are kind of bombarding us and available everywhere. Um, and it I think it's important to, if you can, try and compare the characteristics of the people who did respond to known characteristics of the population that you're interested in, because non-response is not always a problem in interpretation if we can determine that the characteristics of the people that responded are pretty much the same as the non-respondents. So um, really that is a key point. And we can adapt to this as well by designing maybe shorter surveys, maybe more mobile friendly surveys, doing pre-testing, checking our wording and doing things like that. Also monitoring for unusual patterns that might suggest low effort or automated responses. If is someone who maybe did this AI or mobile survey, did they agree to everything? Well, maybe we want to throw out that response, but um, I think non-response is a bigger problem than it was because surveys are everywhere.
All right.
Mhm.
So how can I use surveys? How can surveys be used in partnership with other assessment tools to improve the use of data and data literacy beyond compliance?
Mm.
That's a good one.
Oh boy, yeah, yeah. Well, the question was about using surveys plus other tools, and I'll go to that. But I also remembering one of the comments that I think we saw at the beginning of the session. I would like to point out that in a survey, I think it's very useful to offer people opportunities to provide qualitative or open feedback. So, um, when we think of surveys, we tend to think of like checking boxes or, answering scales. But I would like to encourage you to incorporate open-ended responses where people can provide context or provide some of that rich description that a survey scale doesn't allow for. And I know we had a lot of questions about AI too. AI can be very helpful in identifying themes, really quickly among the responses, maybe more quickly than using a I tend to use hyper research when I'm doing qualitative analysis. People use in vivo, but sometimes we don't want to include those qualitative responses because it's so hard and so it takes so long to analyze them. So that question made me think of the balance between the quantitative and the qualitative within a survey instrument. And then, Tia Maria, the question was about how can we use surveys as well as other assessments to, can you
To
finish the end of it?
to improve the use of data and data literacy beyond
Mhm.
compliance.
Yeah, no one method and no one instrument gives us the full picture. And so I think if we have like a culture survey, maybe an employee culture, institutional culture survey, we've got data from that. I think it's useful to combine that maybe with focus groups, so that you can get of employees that can give you another angle or some more complete information to help you understand climate better. Um, and I think we need to link these, whatever these different methodologies or assessments, link them with something that's important to us. Maybe it's an institutional goal. Maybe it's something that we want to change. Maybe it's a decision that needs to be made. Sometimes people, like employees or faculty, they get a survey and they're like, ah, nothing's going to come of it. I answer these questions. I never hear anything. I never hear anything about it. And then they're like, why should I do it? And so maybe they do it out of compliance. But if they don't see that the data goes anywhere or leads to any change or leads to, it could be confirmation that the status quo is okay. I think we owe it to our respondents or the people we're asking to provide we're asking them to provide their data to us to show that we're using the data for a purpose. And I think that's where sometimes people say, why should I do this? Or maybe they're forced and they comply, but they don't take it too seriously. And then as the people using the data, we're using data that maybe isn't that valid. So I think we need to connect it to a purpose, a decision, a goal, and share the results back with people. I think that can be helpful.
Wonderful. I see a hand from Catherine
Uh-huh.
Quinlan from the School of Education.
I'm gonna
Hi.
maybe stop sharing because then I can see
Okay,
people's faces. Would that be
wonderful.
okay? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So, Catherine, No, I think it was Catherine.
Oh, sure. I think Christy was
Oh,
waiting to.
Chris,
Yeah,
I saw Christy's hand as
I saw
well. Yeah.
Christy's hand as well.
Okay.
Mhm.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was wonderful. I would like to know, please, if you want to learn more information on how to do data, analyzing data and just doing surveys. I understand you mentioned a couple of things you had done in your bio. Could you talk about for someone that wanted to take some extra classes or some extra book learning within this area?
Mhm.
Would you, or the local schools, could you give us a little bit of context or recommendations on
Mhm.
those?
Yeah, I can tell you like something that we are doing at Northeastern, and I can share it. Well, I could share it. I'd share a screenshot of it if you wanted, or I could talk to Tia Marie as well afterwards. But at like we have a data literacy SharePoint site at Northeastern, and one page or one section of it is like learning opportunities for people. And like I am the data literacy program. I don't have staff or anybody working with me. So if we were to rely on courses I create as the only source of learning for people, we'd be waiting a long time. So one of the ways we're working around that is in this on the data literacy SharePoint site, we have a section with probably 15 different categories of things people are interested in. One of them is survey design, and survey analysis. So we've got, decision leadership with data, Tableau, using Tableau, data analysis with Excel, data culture. I mean, different topics. And I've gone through, scoured like the internet and other sources and identified quality, kind of free online sources, whether they be short courses that people can take online, or maybe some of them are instructional guides. We've got instructional videos as well. And then I've got these online with the name and the learning, the learning outcomes and how long will it take and other information. And that's one way we are providing our faculty and staff with resources that they can use to upskill in some of these areas. Um, if you're looking for like a more for credit type or a program, I think Coursera and edX have some really good different like certificate programs or individual courses, and I could even like look through some and communicate back with Tia Marie and maybe give you some recommendations. I did a couple of certificate programs myself because I got interested in big data. I was working in assessment and um, data, but then like there are some methodologies associated with this big data that we have available to us that I haven't learned. And I think there's some great certificate programs out there. Like the University of California, Irvine, I thought they have a few different certificate options that I think are really good. And I could definitely share some more information, through Tia Marie, but I'd be happy to share with you some of the survey learning opportunities we have on our SharePoint site that have kind of been vetted by us and I think are good quality. And for our employees, the ones we put online, for the most part, like the limit for each course has been a couple of hours. We don't want our employees to look and say, oh, if this is a 10, 20-hour course, that could be hard, but you might be willing to do something like that. But so I don't think I've given you a definitive like one way of doing it, but I'm happy to share some of the ways that we've done that. Um, would that
Thank you.
be,
That
does that
that
help?
works very well.
Mr.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
It does. So I'll reach out to Miss Doxy and then she can give me some more advice as well. Thank
Sure.
you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. And great question. Yeah.
Catherine
Mhm.
Quinlan.
Thank you so much. So I
Hello.
have two questions for you. Hi.
Mhm.
I'm in STEM education, and for years I've had a conversation with STEM faculty about not doing pre and post as much, mostly because I do a lot of formative types of assessment as
Mhm.
well. What I'm curious about, because I've upset a lot of people about this, I know that there are a lot of pros for doing the pre and the post.
Mhm.
But my thinking is, even when we look at, everybody will come with a background. I guess my question is, we come with a lot of reasons for doing the pre as well. What's not a good reason for doing both other than testing fatigue? Is there not a good reason
Is there not a good reason to
to do both
not?
pre and post? Like
Okay.
instead of just
Yeah.
post.
Well, I'll tell you something that I have done and have looked hard at some of the literature to justify. Lots of times I'm called in like to do a program evaluation project after a project's already begun, so you can't do the pre because you're already halfway through the program. And so you can't do the pre. If you only do a post, you certainly know the levels that students are at. You don't know how much they've learned because you don't know where they started. But you could say, wow, 85% of people met standard, or they've mastered all these competencies. One thing that I do in my practice, and that is supported by a lot of research, is sometimes I do retrospective at the end. I mean, if it's a skill, I can't say to somebody, okay, do this problem and then do it the way you would have done at the beginning. But sometimes for more attitudinal kinds of constructs, I have asked questions, or like, how well did you understand this at the beginning, and how well do you understand it now? So it's not a direct measure of achievement, but it's getting at growth. And there is some research to support doing that, because sometimes people don't know how much they don't know until they've actually experienced the learning. So sometimes at pre, if you it and again, this is not giving someone a STEM problem, figure it out, and then you give an equivalent problem at the end. But if you say, well, indicate your level of understanding of such and such a concept. Sometimes they say hi. And then when you talk to them at the end, they're like, whoa, I thought I understood it, but I really didn't. I learned so much. So that is one way to support the idea of doing retrospective pre with the post. I mean, I think if you wanted to measure direct learning, pre and post is the way to do it. Because if you've got people, you only have the post, you might know people are performing really well, but you don't know that it was because of your program. You only know they're at a very high level. And of course, even with pre and post, if you really want to say with high confidence, it's because of this program that people learned, so much. You really should do some like random assignment to groups and things like that, which isn't always possible in a real life situation. But if you want to be able to talk about growth, some kind of pre, whether it's retrospective or really at the time of pre, is pretty necessary. But in real life, it's not always possible. So I don't know what you're encountering, in your own
Right.
work, whether it's entering the scene when it's too late, or whether people say it's too time consuming maybe to do a pre. I'm not sure what the reasons are that you're facing for that, but that's kind of my thought on that topic.
Okay.
I hope it's helpful.
No. This is helpful. The other question I have is how are you? I've seen two situations where sometimes, um, for example, I created a survey that I gave out and stuff, and I did it mostly because I was concerned sometimes about certain constructs that were being created, but it's not because I'm a statistician. So I partnered and I even, worked with a statistician. I'm wondering, I guess my question is, when you look at a survey instrument and balancing importance between understanding of the construct that goes into creating it versus the analyses itself, you
Mhm.
know, How do you weigh those two?
And do you mean, understanding the construct in terms of kind of the questions you design and how many? Um, is that what you mean about like understanding the construct?
Well, I guess, for example, I've seen poor constructs with beautiful data analysis, um, beautiful constructs with poor data analysis.
Hmm. Well, yeah, sometimes the data analysis can look beautiful, even though if you look underneath it, it doesn't, there's not much there. But one thing that I always do when I design a survey and I'm, measuring a construct, not just like, how often do you, do this or that? I do an item analysis. I do, if I'm measuring a construct, like an attitude about something, or maybe, a new practice, I will do a reliability analysis because, say I have 10 questions that are meant to measure satisfaction with a course. I mean, if we look at a student survey, and then I want to be able later to make some kind of pronouncements about the level of student satisfaction. I better make sure that this construct I'm measuring and the scale I'm using, that it is reliable. And so I will look at the level of reliability. That's kind of the degree to which the questions kind of hang together, correlate with each other. And I sometimes will throw out questions, because if you do a reliability analysis, it will tell you, like this question is decreasing the measurement of the rest of your scale. And then I will only analyze the good items after. And so I think that kind of helps with the quality of the later data analysis. I also look at and do an item analysis. Reliability is part of it, but you can look at the quality of your questions. Like, do students who do really well on the test, do all the high achievers like not do well on this easy item? And you're like, well, there's something going on with this question. So I guess one of the things I'm trying to say is I will do a lot of testing of the data that comes from my survey before I do the data analysis that I use to share the results, because I want to have evidence that the data is, the inferences, the decisions we make are reliable, and that when I say I'm measuring, you know, job satisfaction, I really am measuring job satisfaction and not reading level or something like that. So I think it's important to do have this item analysis phase, which it involves statistical analysis before you do, you run your means and averages and make your charts and, share them with people.
Thank you. I
Thank
guess I
Thank you.
realized as you answer, I'm thinking of framing. I'm going to share my paper with you. I'd love your feedback if you have
Sure.
time.
Yeah, yeah. Tia Maria has my email
Yeah.
address. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you.
Well, we want to thank all of you for being engaged participants, for asking questions, including the questions that you provided. We will be sending out a recording and a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. Dr. Gracia, we thank you again so much for dropping knowledge today and your wisdom, and we will be putting it to good use. In the chat, I put a survey, an
Survey,
evaluation
yes.
for some feedback. So we ask that you
Uh-huh.
take 2 minutes to give us some feedback. And thank you for staying over. I realize it is 11:49 and many of you
Yeah.
have other places to be. So thank you and look forward to other opportunities to engage in the data literacy space soon. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
checking. Oh, there she is.
People, oh yeah, I see people are waiting.
Mhm.
You let her in.
Good morning. Good morning, Dr. Gracia.
Hello, I'm checking my sound. Wait one second.
It's working.
You sound great. Welcome.